Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Today we have two great guests coming on the show. In the first hour, we have John Meegan talking about the mysteries and esoteric teachings of the Sistine Chapel. And in the second hour, we have Ed Gray Lorimer talking about In Search of Mr. or Mrs. Right. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. And just to let you know, the Institute of Applied Energetics, which is the training program that I've authored, is where you can learn to become a energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or certified medical intuitive. And all of our training is on sale all through the month of April. So please do visit www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, or you can find that information as well on soulhealer.com. So just in case you've missed a show, Just Energy Radio can be, you can listen to the archives at the Just Energy Radio website, and you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep you informed of who's coming up on the show. You can also go and listen to the shows on our YouTube channel, which is Just Energy Radio on YouTube. Or you can download the Inception Radio Network app for your phone, or come to the Inception Radio Network site where you can listen to this show as well as all of the excellent programming that's available on at this location. Oh, man. So just to let you know, I did a 2-hour interview just before coming on here, so I'm a little beleaguered. Blech. Now I have to read these intros, and let's just hope it all goes well. So let me tell you a little bit about our first guest, John Meegan, and get him on the air. As a young man of 26, William began researching Judeo-Christian scriptures, symbolism, mythology, metaphysics, psychology, and other related subjects in an effort to obtain an understanding of what the Holy Writ was saying. He is a Roman Catholic and has geared his studies in an effort to understand the Church's explicit as well as esoteric teachings. This interest led to his publishing a number of works on this subject. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio the author of The Sistine Chapel, A Study in Celestial Cartography, John Meegan. Hey, William, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis.
Well, thanks for having me, or thanks for coming on the show. You know, I don't know that I've ever seen another book about the Sistine Chapel, so it was really interesting to go through and kind of get your insights on it. But before we get into the book, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you became interested in the study of the Sistine Chapel in the first place.
Well, being a Roman Catholic, it happens to be one of the major artworks of Catholicism. And I happened to be at a friend's wake, and I happened to get in that day's mail a book on Michelangelo and on the Sistine Chapel. And as I was going through it, I spotted the temptation and expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And as I looked at this here fresco panel on the ceiling, I saw that there was two serpents wrapped around the tree rather than one. And this kind of shocked me because it was against all the teachings that I have been told about the Adam and Eve story. So I realized that the symbolism of the chapel was had esoteric teachings that the church didn't explicitly teach, but left it there for you to find on your own. So I began to look at the entire chapel to see if the whole chapel was a unified system of thought rather than separate different ideas, or the artist didn't just go into the chapel and paint what he wanted and then leave. I believe that everything was actually finished before even the building's cornerstone was laid. They knew exactly what would happen long before Michelangelo was even born. That's how I began.
Interesting. So, can you provide with the listeners with a little bit of the history of the Sistine Chapel? Just, some general descriptions, because I know what the Sistine Chapel is, and I'm sure if once you start describing it, everyone will go, "Oh yeah, I know that place." But we're on the radio.
Yes, Pope. It was Pope Sixtus IV who actually come up with the idea of building the Sistine Chapel, and basically the Sistine Chapel is known mostly for Michelangelo's paintings on the ceiling. They're considered some of the, if not the greatest frescoes in the world. And everybody looks at the Last Judgment on the west wall as one of the great masterpieces of the world. And how do I put this? This goes back to the Renaissance period, and we tend to look at the Renaissance period as a primitive era, but actually they were very sophisticated in what they did. The Sistine Chapel is basically a commentary on the esoteric teachings in the first chapter of Genesis. And we don't tend to look at the Bible as if it is anything more than a surface storyline or a mythology. But actually, the Hebrews, when they wrote the Torah or the Bible, every single letter of the Bible had a numerical and a symbolic value, an alphanumeric designate and a symbol, so that every word was cram-packed with symbols. So you just can't read the Bible linearly as if you're reading a storyline like in a novel. So the Catholic Church, in all its great monuments, actually did commentaries on the first chapter of Genesis. And that's all they ever did, going back to Dante's Divine Comedy, Chartres Cathedral, to even St. Peter's Basilica. All of it is commentary on the Genesis creation account. But we look at all of this as if they are different artworks, and they are different artworks, but as if they have different meanings or different purposes. But that's the main purpose, is to do a commentary on the Genesis creation account, because it talks to you about your soul. And the only way to get at this esoteric teachings is by studying the original Hebrew and learning the mathematical patterns that exist in Genesis. When you look at the symbolism in the Sistine Chapel, you will see also grand patterns in the chapel. In fact, no art historians have written about the patterns that I've discovered in that chapel and were able to lay out in the book.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, your book is just jam-packed with information, jam-packed. But I do want to tell you, I love Michelangelo's work, and actually, from where I'm sitting in my studio, I have a picture of the creation of man hanging on the wall in a frame. I've had it for years and years and years. God's watching over me.
Well, that's a very interesting panel. If you really study it, study the God creating Adam. You got to read the second chapter of Genesis. When you look at that and the creation of Eve, and then maybe you'll understand what has taken place there. Because Adam looked so beautiful, he looks like the perfect man. But actually, if you look at the creation of Eve, you can see Adam on the floor as if the body was nothing but skin. And that's how Adam ends up, because Eve is being born. The soul is coming out of Adam. And that was the end result, is the creation of Eve, the perfect woman, the spiritual woman. And Adam died, but the man that came off the table or off the altar was something altogether different than the Adam that went on the altar before a rib was taken out of him. So, as you say, that picture of Adam, you see the two fingers coming together, almost touching. Well, if you go to a mirror and you point your finger into the mirror, you're going to see the same results as what Michelangelo did. That inch between the two fingers is infinite, as infinite between the object and the image in the mirror. And if you look at the legs of God in relationship to the legs of Adam, and the arm of God with the relationship to the arm of Adam, it looks like he's perfectly making Adam into the physical image, but he's actually doing a spiritual image of Adam.
Well, I'm just glad I got this picture sitting in front of me, because as you're talking, I'm going, okay, yeah, never looked at it from that perspective. But I think it's interesting that you talked about how they're discussing the narratives of Genesis. Considering it's, a Catholic church, it wasn't until I read your book that I realized how much Old Testament material is actually in that church, which kind of surprised me. Why do you think they did that? Why not have more about, Jesus and the life of Jesus versus Genesis?
Well, actually, the entire chapel is relating to the entire Bible, but we only see different portions of it. If you look up at the ceiling and the patterns that are on the ceiling, the Zodiac calendar year is up there, but most people don't see the Zodiac because they go through the chapel at the speed of summer lightning. They're only in there for 15 minutes, a half hour, and they're seeing these magnificent frescoes and all the beautiful colors, and they're not having time to think about what they're looking at. But if you look at the ceiling, you'll notice that there are 7 prophets up there, and there are 5 women civil oracles. And if you notice the pattern beginning with Zechariah, when you walk into the chapel from the east, not the west. Today in modern times, people come into the chapel from the west, which is the wrong way to come into the chapel. If you come in from the east, Zechariah is right above you. And when you look to your left, which is the south wall, you'll see the Delphic oracle above, which is February. And if you clock off each one of the signs of the Zodiac, you'll find that February has 28, 29 days, so that's a female. And all the other days with 30 days in it, like April, June, September, and November, all of them have civil oracles in them also. And then every other sign with 31 days will have a prophet in it. So this is a perfect mirror image, you might say, of putting the civil and the prophets into the Zodiac calendar year. That's how I discovered the Zodiac calendar year on the ceiling. It's a beautiful thing that Michelangelo did, because it's a gigantic rectangle, the chapel. And it doesn't look like it's a circle or a dome. But that's what Michelangelo was doing. He was actually creating the dome of the Sistine Chapel. There are 2 different Solomon temples. There is the rectangle, or there is the Solomon's temple in the round. So symbolically, even though the chapel is in the rectangle, which would be it morphs into that Solomon's temple in the round. And you won't see that unless you begin to see the different symbolic patterns that are on the ceiling. And you can relate it to what's beneath the ceiling. And between the frescoes on the ceiling and those below are 32 popes, or 28 popes. There were initially 32. And the popes separate the heavenly frescoes from the earthly frescoes. That's when you look at the first verse of Genesis, and you see, in the beginning, God separated the heavens and the earth. Well, 32 times that the word God is used in the first chapter of Genesis. When you look at the probes on the seal, in between the ceiling and the floor, you'll see that there's 28, but there was initially 32 of them. And so the probes are separating the heavens and the earth. So you can see how it mirror images what the Genesis creation account is saying.
What happened to the other two popes?
Well, the other four popes they weren't deleted as far as symbolically understanding what the chapel represents, because that will always be there. And they're very important to understand that anything deleted doesn't mean it's no longer important. It's very important to remember the past. But Michelangelo had to destroy the West Wall in order to put up the Last Judgment. And the Last Judgment fresco, if you really take a look at it in relationship to the other walls, that's why I have that picture of the Last Judgment on the cover of the book, so that you can see it in relationship to the north and south walls. And you'll notice that the different tiers on the Last Judgment, the different correspond to the different tiers on the other walls, so that the ancestors of Christ mirror image the lunettes on the altar wall, with the cross of Christ going into heaven and the pillar of bars going into heaven. Then on the level of the popes, you'll see the Christ and Mary and the communion of saints. Then below that, you have the people that come out of their crypts or descending into hell. On the level of the life of Christ, there's 6 cycles in the life of Christ and 6 cycles in the life of Moses on that level. And beneath that, you actually have the grave and the mouth of hell, where people are descending into the mouth of hell and the people coming out of their crypts. These are people that come into the chapel to receive the Holy Eucharist. So you're either being born again, or you're going back down into hell, or symbolically going into hell. But this only means that you're becoming spiritual again, or you're denying Christ either way. That's what the symbolism. But really studying the Last Judgment, for example, you'll learn that between the Last Judgment is actually saying, don't come to the priest or to the Catholic Church for about God. Come directly to God. Don't go to the spirits or the gurus or the ancestors of Christ or the ancestral kings of Christ, but what Christ is all about. You come directly to God, because that's what the Last Judgment is. How do you believe in God? Do you believe in through spirits or gurus or through history or through church dogma, or do you go directly to God?
But isn't that kind of against the church edict? You know, aren't you supposed to go to the priest because they're the emissary of God?
No, the whole purpose of the Catholic Church, the whole purpose of the priesthood, is that they're nothing but curators. They preserve the teachings of Christ, and that's their whole purpose. No other purpose do they exist. For example, the Catholic Mass that is done every single day is a mystery play. And once you begin to understand what the mystery play is saying, then you realize, like me, I haven't gone to church in maybe 25 years. And the reason for it is I know what the mystery play is saying. There are 3 readings of the Catholic of the Bible, the Old and New Testament. And then you have a priest getting up there, and he gives you the homily of what those readings are all about. He gives you an interpretation of that. And then you have the Eucharist. Well, the readings of the Bible, the homily, and the Eucharist, these are 3 in 1. You are receiving the Eucharist when you hear the Word of God. And when you hear the priest giving an interpretation, that is also the Eucharist. And the wafer host is merely a symbolism of you receiving this. So basically what the church is saying is go home and do likewise. So when you go home and you open your Bible with the full intent of trying to understanding it, you are actually the priest, and you are evoking the Eucharist and asking Christ to come into your life. And that's the whole purpose of that Eucharistic play. It's very similar to when Sigmund Freud went into that Shakespearean play on Oedipus, and he understood instantly what that play represented, the Oedipus complex. And then we have psychology began with that. But that's what those ancient theatrical plays were all about, those mystery plays, was to invoke in you a sense of what the true meaning of was all about. But some people go to church for 40 years and they don't understand what is being said or what the symbolism means. Because they're not
and
looking.
I don't remember them teaching that. I went to Catholic school. I don't remember them teaching that in school at all.
No,
but I like it.
The church
I
does
like
not
it.
teach you.
Well,
You were born a Catholic then?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, it's not the purpose of the church. Most people don't want to know about God, and so the church doesn't go out there and tell you what the deep secrets are all about. Because if you really wanted to know, then you would study, and you would find these things out because they're right there in front of you if you're willing to look. For example, up on the ceiling, if you really study the ceiling, you'll see that Michelangelo created an architectural design of the ceiling. There are 24 columns up there. But on each one of the columns are two cherubim-like figures. And on the adjoining column, there are another two. And these four are paired off. They mirror image each other. And when you go around the chapel, you'll also see that for every two columns, there are two cherubims mirror imaging the next two. And this goes right around the chapel like this, 48 cherubims, and there are 24 sets of them mirror imaging the other 24. Then this is right there in front of you. And most people do not see this. They just see the pretty pictures. And then they have these like triangular pendentive spandrels where they have these bronze adult figures laying on them, lounging on them, and they mirror image each other. So you have exactly 36 pairs of mirror imaging figures. And this is a precise pattern known as the Shemorsin, or the 72 names of God. And it's a well-known symbol in the occult literature. So here you have the Zodiac calendar. Here you got the 72 names of God. And then when you look at the ancestors of Christ, you see that there are 33 of them, and then there are 3 additional symbols to make the 36 beacons of the Zodiac. So the whole ceiling is the Zodiac calendar year. But how many people actually recognize that? Art historians have not written about it. Nobody has written about it in 500 years. And it literally shocks me that this hasn't been done. It's almost as if there's a consensus that nobody's going to talk about this esoteric teaching. But you ask, well, why did the church do this? Why did they put all this symbol there and not say anything? Well, when you read the New Testament, you have Christ in the New Testament talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and he says, you're hypocrites, you're stone sepulchres, you're white sepulchres, full of filth and all kinds of evil things. Well, when you look at those cherubims that I was just talking to you about, those 48 cherubims mirror imaging each other, you notice that they are statue-like figures. They are passive. They're not doing anything. And the same thing with the bronze-like figures going around the chapel. They're lounging on very much like Adam is lounging on that hill, or very much like Noah, who is lounging on a couch. They're passive. They're not doing anything. But when you look into the Granata, or the Zodiac, the 12 signs of the Zodiac, you'll see that each and every one of them, the Sibyls and the prophets, are very active. They're writing a book, and they got 2 of these cherubims whispering into their ear, like the Catholic Church says, you got the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. And that's the very concept that is being portrayed there. So you got to become active. Otherwise, you're just believing in what the priests say, or you're taking the dogma for what it is. You're not trying to understand what the dogma is saying. And by them sitting there writing, they're understanding what it's all about, and they're putting it down into words. Like me, when I write all this down, I learn more by writing and trying to explain it. I'm learning a great deal by just doing that. And I believe that's what the whole purpose of the sealing is to show people they have to go from being passive to active. And not many people do that.
So are you sure you're not Jewish? I mean, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, or that the impression I got in reading some of your material was that you study Gematria. Do you know what that word is?
Gematria, yes. It's the numerical symbolism of the words of the sacred scriptures. And that's a very important part of analyzing the text and understanding it. No, I'm not Jewish. I can't speak it, read it, or write it. But I did.
But I mean, that's the only tradition that I've ever seen people take an active look at, symbolism. I mean, there's Gematria, but then there's other, there are other, necromancy or something. I don't know. There are other things within, Jewish, big picture Kabbalistic tradition that really look at, symbolism and the relationship to the words and the stories. And it just seems like that is what you're doing. Maybe you were Jewish in a past life or something. You never know. It could happen.
One of the things I discovered and I put into the book is that the first chapter of Genesis has, and I do an analysis of the chapter of Genesis, and I show all these graphic images that I discovered in that chapter. The 32 Elohims, when you put those together, right, like God said, 10 times God said, there were 7 times that God saw, 3 times God made, and then there were 12 other times various words used. And these are the single letters, the 7 times are the double letters, the 3 times are the mother letters, and the 10 times is the sephers, or the numbers. So you have the Kabbalistic tree of life actually embossed graphically into the first chapter of Genesis. And I show that graphic image in my book. And for thousands of years, people wonder, where did the Kabbalistic tree of life come from? Where did the image come from? And that's where it comes from, the first chapter of Genesis. But I got the idea from a Rabbi Kaplan in his Sefer Yesefer. But he made a mistake because he was going by tradition rather than looking at the Torah for what the Torah itself was saying. I went by precisely what the Torah was saying, and I corrected his mistake. And then I put the 32 Elohims into a circle, and when I did it, you can literally see the Kabbalistic tree of life come to life. Also, the 12 single letters, when you look at it, they have 6 of the Elohims pair up into 3 sets, 180 degrees from each other, creating a perfect Star of David right there in the first chapter of Genesis. But most people, they read the first chapter of Genesis, they see the 6 days of creation, they think that's all it's talking about. But it's not. It's talking about, as you say, Jewish mysticism. You got to read the Zohar, because the Zohar is nothing. It's all about the Kabbalistic tree of life. So there are many, many symbols, and Gematria is a great aspect of how to interpret the Bible. For example, the first letter of the Bible is called Bet. Well, the first letter is actually the entire Bible, Old and New Testament. The Old and New Testaments are commentaries on that one letter. And I know that we in modern times cannot conceive of how the one letter can actually represent the whole Old and New Testament, but it does. It's very similar to the Hindus with their sound Om. And this word Om, they can actually make that sound go on for hours without stopping. And that's exactly what Bet does. It creates the entire Old and New Testament. But when me and you, or the average person, looks at the Torah and sees that letter, we think it's the first letter of the Bible, but it is not the first letter of the Bible. In the white area, inside and surrounding the letter Bet, is another letter. It's the 17th letter of the Hebrew alphabet called Pei. And Pei represents the mouth of God. And from the mouth of God comes Bet, which is the raison d'etre, or the reason for existence for every soul that comes into the world. So you literally have to break down each letter and each word and in relationship to the verse in order to understand what it is truly saying. And that doesn't take a few minutes. That takes a lifetime of study. I've been at it for 39 years.
Or
when
more.
I began to study the artwork of Catholicism, whether it's Chartres Cathedral or Dante Alighieri's mathematical system. I broke Dante's mathematical system years ago, and I wrote a book on that. No matter what the artwork, you'll see that it's a commentary on this very subject matter I'm talking about in the first chapter of Genesis.
Well, one of the things that you, I'm going to kind of mix it up here a little bit. You know, one of the things you talked about was that all of the artwork that's in the Sistine Chapel was intentionally planned. What makes you think that?
Well, one of the things is that the measurements of the chapel, the chapel is 3 times squared, meaning that you can take 3 perfect squares and put them next to each other in the big rectangle, and you got the measurements of the Sistine Chapel. And when you understand what what that means, is that, as I said, there's 2 Solomon temples. There's a big rectangle, and then you can see that that rectangle actually morphs out into an octagon shape. And this is the Sistine Chapel, the Solomon's Temple in the round. So you have either the Jewish temple, which is in a rectangle, or you have the Christian Solomon's Temple, which is in the round. If you look at the gift of the keys of a fresco in the Sistine Chapel of Christ giving the keys to Peter, you'll see that in the background, you'll see this octagon-shaped temple. And this is precisely what the Sistine Chapel is supposed to look like on a symbolic level. Just as I told you, the ceiling morphs into a gigantic dome, and just on top of this octagon shape. This is the same thing that took place at St. Peter's Basilica. When Constantine built the St. Peter's initially back in the 4th century, it was a gigantic rectangle. Then when Pope Julius knocked it down, he rebuilt it, and he rebuilt it into the octagon shape. And you'll see this pattern throughout Christendom, like Chartres Cathedral. It was originally a gigantic rectangle built by Bishop Fulbert, and it was done in the Romanesque period, Romanesque architect. And all of that was conceived even prior to the Gothic Cathedral being built. The Gothic Cathedral was actually completed before the Romanesque Cathedral was actually built. And you say, well, they didn't know of the Gothic architect at the time. Well, they certainly did, because all you have to do is go back into the Byzantine period or go back into the Islamic buildings, and you'll see it all. So it wasn't that the Gothic Cathedral knew. It was maybe new to Christianity, but it wasn't new to the world. And so all of these things were created long before that they were actually built, like Dante's Divine Comedy. Before Dante wrote a word, his entire project mathematically was complete, and that is a very sophisticated mathematical system. Not sophisticated as far as trigonometry or algebra or something like that. It's basic mathematics. It's multiplication, division, subtraction, and addition. But these 4 basic mathematical sciences are used to perfection. And you'll see that when you begin to start studying, like Dante. I actually have the 5th appendix that go into Dante. I show the simplicity of the mathematics, and yet I show how very complex it can get. So to say that the Sistine Chapel was conceived before they built the cornerstone, that's precisely what happened. Michelangelo was given direct orders of what they wanted and how they wanted it done, and he simply went in there and did it. Now, one of the things to notice about the Sistine Chapel is that when Michelangelo went into that chapel to do his job, they had the mosaics in the floor were already complete. They had the life cycles of Moses and Christ were complete. Then you had the popes going midway up the chapel was complete, and then you had the star-studded ceiling. It was Michelangelo's job to go up to the ceiling and do that ceiling by doing an interpretation of all the symbols that were already created in the chapel. So the entire ceiling, the Zodiac calendar year up there, is actually a commentary of all the ceilings that are beneath the popes. And I actually do a commentary in the showing that each sign of the Zodiac mirror images one of the frescoes of Christ or one of the frescoes of Moses. It's like it's a gigantic yin-yang symbol in the chapel, light and darkness, because that's what it's all about. It's about showing you you choosing between light and darkness. You're choosing your raison d'etre, your reason for existence, as if like the world is a smorgasbord. So, yes, you're quite right when you say that the chapel was finished before it started.
Well, it just seems like such a huge undertaking with all of, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's 1 square inch of that chapel that doesn't have a fresco on it except for the windows and doors, obviously.
Yes. And 2 of those windows were taken away. It had to be that way because you got to realize that the Bible, the purpose of the Bible and the purpose of the artwork of Catholicism is to teach you about your soul. The entire Bible, Old and New Testament, tells you nothing more than about your soul. It's all about your soul. We tend to think it's the histories of the Jews or the beginning of Christianity. That is the surface storyline. But beneath the text, it's all about your soul. And I know that a lot of people listening to this, it's hard to believe what I'm talking about. And the only way that you
what I kind of find hard to believe, William, is that the popes knew all this stuff. I mean,
well, they're supposed to know it because they're supposed to
but
teach
I don't hear. I just don't. And I mean, we're talking about a long time ago, but I don't say Catholic Church equals on any level symbology. Like any of that esoteric kind of alchemical stuff was, it was heretical.
Well, it's heretical to teach it. It was explicitly. It has to be there esoterically. It's, for instance, let me give you an example. And I don't mean to be offensive when I say this. The whole purpose of the church, as I said, is to be that the priests are nothing but curators. They're to preserve the teachings. The woman gives life, so she can't be a priest because she will not be passive. She's proactive. She actually gives birth to the world. And that's why the church cannot change that symbolism. They cannot allow the woman to become a priest because that would change up the symbolism in the world, and people will lose that nuance if they were to do that. So the church is quite right by not. It's not that the woman is not a priest. She certainly is, because the Catholic Catechism actually says that every person that is baptized as a Catholic is a priest, and a priest after the order of Melchizedek. It's just that the woman is not an ordained priest. But you see women all the time teaching catechism. They're teaching schools. They do everything other than perform that boring theatrical play that a man does all the time. Like, you ever see women, when they're wearing clothing, they have a lot of color to their clothing, different colors. Where a man, he'll go along and wear a blue suit or a black suit or a gray suit. He's very happy with the one color. Boring, but that is the way of the world. That is the symbolism of the world. But people don't take notice of these things. For example, I met 3 Catholic priests one day in Columbus Circle here in Syracuse, New York, and I happened to mention that on Park Street and Court Streets, there's a St. John the Baptist Church. And when you're standing out the altar and you're looking out over the congregation, you see the Stations of the Cross on the wall, and they're numbered 1 to 14 from left to right. Go into any other Catholic church in the city, and you will see that all the Stations of the Cross are numbered 1 to 14 from right to left. Now, that's diametrically opposite to that of St. John the Baptist on Park Street. And when I told them that, they told me, oh, no, you're wrong. I said, well, the reason for this is that John the Baptist was born 6 months before Christ. And they told me how wrong I was. But some months later, this year, I was going through Columbus Circle again, and that's where the diocese is. Their buildings are right in that area. And there was this Catholic priest, and he was one of the 3, and he comes running across, and he says to me, Bill, I checked that out, what you were talking about, John the Baptist. And he says, you're right. They are opposite to all the other churches in the city. So you can see that even the Catholic priests themselves don't know about this esoteric science. I'm not saying the church itself doesn't know, because they have to have a hierarchy that knows about it. Otherwise, St. John the Baptist Church wouldn't have been built on Park Street in that manner. So somebody knows the truth, but is not actually coming out and telling it.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to throw out a comment that just totally has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But I didn't know that you were in Syracuse. I went to Oswego State. I'm going to be coming through there in June. We'll have to talk on the phone.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, you can call anytime you want.
Okay. One of the things that I think is interesting is that up to the Renaissance, a little after the Renaissance, architects and artists, and I call it alchemical, techniques or celestial ties or other devices to encode intelligence into their building, into their writing. And today, everything is square and painted white. It's true. I mean, what impact do you think doing this, having these pieces of art, having all of this information encoded into the buildings? I mean, there's obviously, people might learn it by looking at it, but do you think there's any kind of energetic piece that might also happen by having these symbols encoded into the building?
Well, I actually had a Catholic priest tell me one day, I said, well, why put all this symbolism there if you're not going to teach it? And he says to me, and it was the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but he said to me, oh, you learn it by osmosis. Well, that's absolute nonsense. I've been at it for 39 years, and I'm still learning from the first chapter of Genesis. How can anybody study one chapter from 39 years? And I'm telling you, the amount of information I got out of that one chapter is incredible. I didn't have to go beyond the first 4 chapters. But it's like I was telling you about my friend's wake. When I went to the wake and I opened that book and I saw that fresco of the temptation and expulsion of Adam and Eve, all of a sudden it hit me what that panel represented. And that it teased me as if I was being gripped by spirituality, and I couldn't put it down from that moment forward. That's on the Sistine Chapel. That was about 15, 16 years ago. But that's what got me started on the Sistine Chapel. But that's how it worked, because most people don't pay attention. They just, like for instance, you go into the chapel and you see these 28 popes on the ceiling. Well, yes, but they don't know that there was 4 popes before that. Now, without knowing that, there's a great deal of symbolism that is totally lost to you, because you're not looking into it, you're not doing the research. But if you did the research on those 32 popes, okay, what was their names? What positions did they hold in the 265 popes? But I found out that they were the first 32 popes, right? And then when I began to look at their positions on the walls, I found that all the even number popes were on the north wall, and all the odd were on the south wall. And then I found that the 2 of those didn't follow that pattern. These are the first 2, the closest to the west wall. That was number 3 and 4. And that 4 was on the odd side, and 3 was on the even side. And I said, well, why did this happen? And then I realized what the answer was, is that every time a pope becomes a pope, he puts on the mantle of all the other popes. He puts on the mantle of the papacy. Now, before the altar wall was down, there was 4 other popes. So if the number 3 and 4 represents the clasp that come across the torso in order to keep the mantle in place on the shoulder, then the other 4 represents the cowl that goes over the head. Now, have you ever seen that there picture of the mystic? He puts his head outside and looks at the universe, at the spiritual universe and all the cycles.
Oh, from under the dome of the world?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly the symbolism that's being displayed here. But there's another symbolism I was just thinking about even before this program started tonight, was that it represents the head of John the Baptist being cut off. Because that's what the church represents. They represent John the Baptist, who is the exoteric. The Christ is the esoteric.
Okay, you lost me with that. I mean, I know what the words are, but I'm not getting the connection.
The exoteric means it's the symbolic or the surface text. It means the outer world. The esoteric is the inner world, or the inner meaning of the words of the sacred scriptures, or the inner meaning of the symbolism of the chapel. For example, there was 28 popes up there, but there's supposed to be 32. Now, learning that there's 32 and learning that what those popes represent, and all of that information is esoteric, or hidden, not deliberately hidden, because it's right there for you to put your analytical abilities to, and you can ferret out what their meaning is. But you've got to do the research, you've got to do the study, and if you don't do all of that, you're not going to know anything about it. People say, well, why is it hidden from me? It's not hidden. You can study it like anybody else, and you will see what the meanings are. Those 32 popes represent the 32 Elohim in the first chapter of Genesis, which brings up visions of the Kabbalistic tree of life. Remember I was telling you about the 12, the 7 prophets and the 5 symbols on the ceiling?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I discovered that zodiac in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. And this is the calendar year that we actually use today in our yearly cycle. And I noticed that the 4 months with 30 days, they create like a butterfly pattern. And when you look at the other 8 months, there's only one way, only one, that produces 2 other precise examples of that butterfly pattern. And when you put these 3 butterfly patterns together, it creates a perfect Star of David, dead center in the ceiling. And you don't see that Star of David up there, but that Star of David represents the star of the Magi. That's the star that the Magi saw, and it took place on January 1st, 8 BC, when Augustus Caesar changed the calendar 6 of the 12 months, and the Julian calendar was morphed into the Augustan calendar, creating the Star of David on that day, on January 1st, 8 BC. Now, Christ was circumcised exactly 2 years later, on January 1st, 6 BC. And this is precisely what the Bible is saying, that the Magi saw the star 2 years before. But many people they do not make the connections, and that's the whole point. Is you got with symbolism, you got to be observant, you got to spot it, and then try to understand what does it mean, what is symbolism there for.
But I think in today's society, we don't have the visual library anymore. I mean, I have a minor in art history, and so things that I remember from that class were things like, if you see a statue and the person in the statue is wearing or carrying some kind of a lion skin and has a club, then it is probably a sculpture of Hercules. Or if the image is seated with a book, or especially has like 2 horns coming out of their head, it's probably an image of Moses. And so I think people had a visual library where they could look at images and recognize who they were. I mean, especially some of the major characters. I mean, they're a saint because they got their little halo going on, or they're a holy person. But I don't think we know beyond that anymore. We haven't been taught that. And because we have things to read, we're not visual learners in that way.
Well, actually, today we have a great resource with the Internet. You have the Vatican website on the Sistine Chapel, and you can get every single image out of that from that website on the Sistine Chapel. I have the best books on the Sistine Chapel. I have the videos, and I have a great deal of material. That's why I was able to write the book in which I wrote. But it's all dependent upon you as an individual. What are you willing to do to learn the truth about your soul? What are you willing to do to learn about God? Do you want to spend your monies on going to movies and expensive dinners, or do you want to use that money to buy books to help you understand what the Word of God is all about? So it's totally dependent upon you. How much time are you going to spend in your researches? An hour a week going to Mass? Or are you going to spend 10 hours a day, 6-7 days a week? I'm not saying you have to do it every day. You can, of course, do recreational time, but you have to put a good deal of time into this. This is not reading a book and voila, you got all the information. I can give you a good idea of how to go about it by reading my book, and you'll see all the patterns and all the mathematical research I did in all these different artworks. But unless you, the individual, actually go to the Bible and see these patterns, it's not going to be shock and awe, because what I say on the radio doesn't mean that much. You either believe me or you don't believe me. But if you go to the Bible and you see these mathematical patterns I'm talking about, then it's you that's making the discovery. It's you that's going to be shocked. It's you that's going to have this awe about what the world does not know, and you just discovered is right there in the Bible, and the world is totally ignorant of it. That's what it's all about.
Well, I was just on that Vatican webpage, and it's pretty impressive. It's like totally interactive. All right, I have to stop looking at it because I could just stare at it for days. I mean, because, you know, and I think that's something really important, is that people need to take the time to study and research, and we have so gotten away from that. I mean, I know myself, I like reading the old boring books with all the dust on them that nobody else really wants to read. Sounds like you really like reading those kind of books too. But a lot of people, they just want it easy. They just want, you know, the easy story and sort of the facts. I don't even want to say they want the facts. They just want the headline, you know, from the newspaper. They don't even want to read the newspaper. They just want the headline. All right, I'm looking at the clock. We have a little over 5 minutes left. All right, you already answered that question. See, I had all these great questions, but you answered all of them. One of the things that I thought was interesting in your book is you were talking about the different images on the ceiling, the main ceiling panels, and, you know, that they start off kind of in order, you know, God separating the light from the darkness and blah, blah, blah. But then for some reason they get out of order. Was there a problem?
They are.
You know, what was the discrepancy?
Sequential order, and I was wishing we had more time to go into that, but within 5 minutes. Well, when you look at the separation of light and darkness, that's day one. These are the 9 central panels of the ceiling. The second panel is the creation of the sun and the moon. The third is the water going onto one place and the dry land appearing. Well, this is the first, fourth, and third days of creation. So you know that the ceiling is out of sequential order. So when you began to number all of them properly and put them into a circle, and then you take a pen and you draw from the number 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 up to 9, you get a chimera of Saturn. It's a 3x3 square. And when you look down on the floor, in front of the altar, there's a 3x3 pattern in circles, and there's 2 flanking the altar. So what thou binds on earth shall be bound in heaven. That's what Michelangelo went to the ceiling to do. Because what was bound on earth, he was binding in heaven. What thou loose on earth, you loose in heaven. So that whole process, that circle of the 9 central panels represents the oculus of the dome. And that, if you look at Sistine, the St. Peter's Basilica, you'll see that Michelangelo, he was building the dome of St. Peter's at the same time he was painting the dome in the Sistine Chapel. It's quite an amazing thing when you think about the 2 projects that he was doing simultaneously, and they were actually the same project.
All right, one last teeny question. Actually, it's a little more of a comment. So I heard that some of Michelangelo's work inside the Sistine Chapel was considered, well, yeah, I'll just say, you know, the Judgment of Man, that there were all these like nude characters all over. But even on some of the other characters on the ceiling, they are not clad. And that they came in and actually like painted the little cloths on all of them. Was there a bunch of scandal with what he had done inside the church? Or was that later on?
No, the modern art historians, there's a number of these new books on the Sistine Chapel come out, and they come up with these weird interpretations of the Sistine Chapel. They're not looking at the chapel like I'm looking at every single icon or every single fresco, and I'm showing that they all come together. they talk about Michelangelo and these artists going in there, and they wanted to spoof the church. They wanted to make the church look like clowns. And that's absolutely ridiculous, because it took 80 years for that church to be built. It took 80 years for all that artwork to be done, and the church was on top of everything. The church, the cardinals, the theologians, they would not have allowed any of that nonsense to be done in the church, because they had people watching over the project at all times. They had a steering committee, and every single artwork in the great artwork of the Catholic Church, they had steering committees, like Chartres Cathedral, the steering committee. The same thing with St. Peter's. So no, that's wrong. That's modern historians' interpretations.
Well, I'll tell you, you made the comment really early in the show that most people go in there and spend 15 minutes. I can't even imagine. I'll go to an art museum with my husband, and, the little walking tour is like 45 minutes, and, 3 hours later, 4 hours later, we finally leave because we have to look at everything. I think I could spend hours in there if I had like a good pair of binoculars too, so I could see really good on the ceiling. That's just really far away.
Well, I had a peer reviewer who did my, when I wrote the academic paper on the Sistine Chapel 7 years ago, it was only 80 pages. But when I first sent it in, it was only 37, and they kept insisting I do more. But anyway, he says to me, while he writes in his review on my work, he says, I wish that I had your paper just one of the times I've been at the Sistine Chapel. He was there about three or four times. But that's what he said when he looked at my, and I've never been to the Sistine Chapel. When he read my paper, that's what his comment was. So I hope that everybody has a chance to get the book. It's either you can get it in an e-book or you can get it hardcover or softcover. I recommend the e-book because then you can write comments, highlight it, and make notes to yourself on the book.
And this is my recommendation. I have to tell you, I had one little tiny frustration with your book. The pictures are way too small. I mean, the ones in the back that are, good size, but some of them were just like, what? So get the book, but get a good book with large pictures of the inside of the chapel so you can really follow along. I think that would make it be even better.
Well, the Vatican website, that's what you also have. That's one of the things I point out in the book. Go to the Vatican website.
And that would be http://mv.vatican.va. Vatican. I don't know. William, so they can get your book on Amazon, I'm thinking, Barnes & Noble. What about a website for people to come visit?
Well, it's the publisher is in my website. It's www.williamjohnmeegan.com, and you can go right to the website that sells the book, or you can, as you say, go to Amazon or the Barnes & Noble.
Great. I just appreciate all the work that you've done on this project because it's substantial. So you should be proud of yourself.
Man, thank you very much.
All right. So I am going to let you go. And thank you so much for coming on the show and being patient with me. And I will talk to you later about Syracuse.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. That was William John Meegan. And we're going to go to break here in 1 second. And I'm Dr. Rita Louise. You're listening to Just Energy Radio. And we'll be back with Ed Lorimer after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.